Welcome to Real World Real Estate, where we will explore, examine, and explain the real process of buying or selling real estate. Here is your host, Stephen Clyde.
Hi, everybody. Stephen Clyde here, with your host of Real World Real Estate with Team Clyde and Remax Preferred Remax at Cherry Hill. Today, we'll be sitting down and speaking with Lynda Hinkle, who is an attorney that specializes in family law, custody, support, domestic violence, LGBT, adoption, elder law, guardianships, estate administration, wills, and estate litigation as well. She's a true Jersey girl. She comes out of Collingswood. She has her JD from Rutgers, as well as a master's in English and a master in teaching from Rowan University. Currently lives in Cherry Hill and practices in Camden County. We actually just had a wonderful 30-minute conversation, but it wasn't recorded for any of you to hear. So that one will be done through osmosis and maybe some seances. But Lynda, I greatly apologize for wasting that 30 minutes. It was a great conversation, but I thank you for allowing me to redo this again for everybody.
No problem.
So we were having a wonderful conversation about real estate and relationships and real estate and wills. So, obviously when it comes to divorce, real estate is usually the primary property dispute that we come into. And I foresee moving forward, as we discussed earlier, and now we're going to rediscuss. So I'm going to have fun with this now as we record it. We've had a very strange real estate market through the pandemic. We've seen the great migration. Everybody's vacating cities and moving to the burbs. They either need more space or they want a yard. They want out of the condo. They want out of the apartment. They need the bigger home because they're both working from home. And they're homeschooling their children in a lot of cases. And I foresee over the next year to 2 years that that's going to be the biggest part of our real estate market, is these couples that were forced to be together 24/7, 365 in confined spaces is going to drive a divorce issue that we're going to see shortly, right? And you're seeing the same thing, because you should be the leading indicator on this, and we're going to be the lagging indicator on this.
Right. So I would agree. There's absolutely a divorce boom happening. China had a divorce boom before us because they had the disease before us. So we sort of knew it was coming. And it absolutely is happening. People are reacting differently to divorce in some cases now than they were doing prior to COVID, because, for example, in some cases, they don't have the financial means or security to leave the home, even though they want a divorce. So they're living together, or they're living together because they share children, and under COVID restrictions, they're working together on the homeschooling, or they just want to make a pod to protect themselves against COVID. So they're staying together on the short term, even though they're going through a divorce, so that they can achieve those goals. Also, because the financial situation is so in flux for some people, they can't afford to move, or in some cases, they're really excited to move quickly because the market is doing so well that they're going to make more equity than they were going to make before. And they need that cash infusion to handle things that are going on, in their economic life or their job life. So lots of changes about how divorce is happening, and lots of changes in how COVID affects their ability to work together with kids and things like that. But definitely, I do think we're going to see more of a real estate boom going forward as people do separate and as their financial situations start to stabilize more.
So let's just say, my wife has a line that she says, she loves me, but she doesn't like me today. It's an ongoing joke in our household. But if she came up and said, we're done, I've had enough of you, I want a divorce. In those situations with COVID and all of the quarantines and the lockdowns and the closures, are the courts even open for someone to pursue this avenue at this point?
Absolutely. So is it moving quickly? Not in every case. Some of the vicinages I work with picked up on working from home and getting things done really quick, and they're doing pretty well. Other vicinages, not so much actually, and you really can't get a lot done. Camden County is struggling right now because they're down a judge, and most of the work is being done by 2 or 3 judges, and they're behind, trying their best, but it's rough. So there's definitely mechanisms to move forward. If you can agree on things, then you can get things done a lot quicker than if you're going to fight to the bitter end over everything, for sure, because I can get an uncontested divorce done in a couple of months. But if we're going to trial, you could be looking at quite a while.
So when you are going to trial, are you going to trial the way you and I are talking today via Zoom, or are you still actually going into the courtroom in front of the judge?
No, we're definitely doing mostly Zoom. There are percentages that have started doing some in person. A couple of judges who prefer that, but it is a significantly small percentage. The majority of work of the judiciary at this point in New Jersey is done via Zoom or telephone.
There's all kind of different steps, I'm sure, in the divorce. Luckily, I've never had to experience that. And as my wife has told me since day one, I'll need an undertaker, not a divorce attorney. So it's very clear to me that I don't want to go down that avenue. But, as they make these steps, obviously you want to reach out to an attorney, but is it a mediation and then a court, or a mediation, a settlement, then the judge, or do they skip mediation now and we're just going right to court?
So in New Jersey, there's a requirement for mediation when you have a custody dispute of any kind, but there's no requirement for mediation for economic differences. So you can choose to do mediation if you like. And in some cases, I have found that is beneficial, even when you have attorneys, to involve a mediator when you're just stuck on an issue and you think you can get there without going to trial, which is much more expensive than a couple hours with a mediator. But the steps are just, somebody's going to file usually. Somebody gets to answer. You exchange discovery. You either come to an agreement, or you end up going to something called an MESP, where you talk to two attorneys attorneys like me, who happen to volunteer in that role to tell you what they think a court would do. If you can agree to that, you can get divorced. If you can't agree, then your next step is moving toward trial. But like I said, that takes a good year or more under normal conditions. Under the current conditions, it can be longer. So I think that probably only 10% of divorces go to trial, and most shouldn't. There are really very rare cases where I think it makes sense to go to trial. If there's a dispute over alimony numbers, if there's a dispute over a business that's significant, or custody, those are really the only reasons that people should ever go to trial, because honestly, everything else is pretty easy to figure out what the court's going to do, especially real estate. They're going to divide the real estate that is 50-50 if you bought it during the marriage. If somebody bought it premaritally, then if you bought it in contemplation of marriage, that's the term, then a judge might find that some or all are subject to equitable distribution. Or if you bought it premaritally and you lived in it for a while beforehand and then the other partner didn't contribute to it, you probably don't have to include it in the distribution of the assets.
All right. So contemplation of marriage, how does a lawyer in that respect, or how does a judge determine mindset, right? If I bought the house while I was dating my wife, then we got engaged and then we got married, how do you prove if I was buying that house in anticipation of being married or contemplation, or I was just buying a piece of real estate?
Yeah, I mean, it's all pretty much circumstantial, and it really has to do with how long did you have it beforehand? Did you both move into it right away? Was there talk of the marriage? You both testifying to what your intent was at the time, and a judge calls the who's telling the truth in the situation.
All right. So let's say I just bought the real estate. I own it. We get married and say I do, and we move into that residence. It becomes the marital residence at that point. Is that from that point forward, are we 50-50 in the house, or is it still mine?
Based on what you just described, it sounds like you purchased it while engaged with the intent of moving in while married. So that would be a marital asset.
Okay. So I owned it before I met my wife, and we decided to make it our marital home. We say I do. From that day forward, is it the equity prior is mine and the equity after is ours?
So if you had it, let's say you had it for 2 years, and you were living there, and then she moves in after the marriage, that's still yours. And the only time then that she has a claim to it, or a portion of it is if during the marriage there's significant improvements that change the value of the house. So you put on a $50,000 deck and now you have more equity during the marriage, then that's subject to equitable distribution, but the original home is not.
Really? Okay. So it's not like in an estate, we do a date of death valuation. So we're not doing like a date of marriage value. It was worth 300 when you got married. When you got divorced, it was worth 400.
No.
Okay.
The asset itself becomes a protected asset, but that is adjusted only by changes that were made to it during the marriage that the marital estate contributed to.
Wow. Okay. So that's a myth, lack of a better term, that I thought was in place. That's not. I love that I learn something new every day. So relationship wise, and I know when we were speaking of this pre-recording, we talked a little bit about it, but we're streamlining it a little bit. If you're in a relationship, but you're not married, you don't know if you're going to get married, but you do want to cohabitate with each other and buy a piece of real estate together, the first step, probably, I would think, even before meeting with me as your real estate agent, would be to sit down with an attorney and come up with a plan for that real estate. They need to sit down with you first, then me, right? Or the two of us together.
That's smarter, but it's also equally valid to have that conversation once you've decided on a property but not purchased it. So, if, for example, definitely before you sign on that dotted line, you should be having some kind of clear plan about what you're going to do. If one partner is going to have their name on it only, has there been a contribution by the other party that needs to be outlined? Because if you ever want to get that money back, you're not going to get it back if you haven't laid that out clearly, unless you get married and then you can prove it maybe in court later. But that's, again, keep your records. People don't keep records, right. And they don't keep a record of what money was put into the down payment on a house. Even if you're doing it while you're married, if you're taking premarital money and putting it into a down payment, keep your records, because if you get divorced, that may be a reason why you get more of a contribution out of the house.
Okay. And you're going down this road, and from everything we've talked about before, I would think even though you're in your 30s or your late 20s or whatever age you are, not only are you planning for that house, but you better be setting up your estate plan simultaneously pertaining to that house.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you intend for your partner to inherit and you don't have the kind of deed that's going to immediately just transfer that property over because you're joined together, you want to make sure that you're clear about that. I have done a lot of litigation where partners have been together for 20, 30 years, just didn't think about it, thought they were going to live forever. The partner who owns the property dies. The partner left behind is thrown out by the kids or whoever else, the state, because they just don't have a claim to that house and they lose everything. And I'm certain that the person that loved them did not intend that. They just didn't think it through.
Well, like we talked about before, we had a client that's 2 years in the process of it. They did the right thing when they bought it, but they didn't take the next step. So they bought, tenants in common. So they each owned 50% of it equally. Their shares went to their respective estates. They had no problem over 10 years until one of them passed and they hadn't pre-planned. So now the remaining homeowner is partners in that home with that person's children that he has no relationship with. And he has to, they want to keep the house and he wants to sell the house. And they're spending a lot of money and most of the equity in litigation over these steps because that next step wasn't taken in the pre-planning of estate.
Absolutely. And estate litigation is so much more expensive than divorces or anything I do in family, honestly, because that particular kind of court takes a very long time, many appearances, lots of discovery, lots of different avenues that take place. You could easily eat up an entire estate, even a large estate, fighting over minimal things. And so, but estate plan, if you plan, it costs so much less. So that's the smart thing to do.
All right. So you're planning on buying the ring or you're planning on receiving the ring. there should be a stop at the attorney before you enter the real estate side. So now, when they're doing this, right, they're not a couple, so they're two individuals. Can they meet with one attorney, or do they need to have two separate attorneys?
So they don't have to have two separate attorneys, but an attorney can only represent one party. So, for example, Joe and Jill want to get married, and they're thinking about getting married in the future, but they want to purchase this house together now. Joe can come to me and I can advise him and I can create a contract, and Jill can choose to take it to an attorney to review, or Jill can say, I know what I'm doing, and agree to it either way.
Okay. But a lot of this stuff is outside general practitioners, right? And I'm not trying to disparage general practitioner attorneys, but I see it a lot here where general practitioners aren't really good just in the real estate side of things. When we bump into them, right? True real estate attorneys are great at it. There's a lot of GPs that, when they send me change letters, I'm quoting back the case law to them that they didn't know because I'm in it so much. I'm assuming that the exact same thing applies to your specialities here, right? Family law and estate law, that there's so many nuances to it that you can't be specialized in everything, right?
Absolutely. And when it comes to estate, there are some finer points that I don't do, and I'll refer to someone else because there's so much there and so many different kinds of things that you can do. And there's tax planning involved sometimes that I might need to refer somebody out on. So there's really some complex stuff, but absolutely when it comes to family, no other practitioner should be doing family. Unfortunately, I have had those adversaries and saved them many times from creating ethics violations for themselves because they don't know what they're doing, and it's such a mess.
It was funny. I was at a closing once, and there was a GP representing the other side of it. And do we call them GPs like we would a doctor, or the
some people say
general
that.
law? Yeah. And there was probably the premier specialized real estate attorney in Cherry Hill on my side of the table. And my wife and I still joke about it. The other attorney was flipping through the contract trying to find his point. And the real estate attorney said, you're looking for this paragraph, but it doesn't apply here because of this. And you started rattling off the top of his head, right? And I joke saying, that attorney was very active for the board in drafting these contracts. He knows it like the back of his hand. Just like I wouldn't enter into, high-end commercial real estate. The lower end of the stuff is very close to what I do, but there's a point where you reach a level in that side of it where, I can't play there anymore, right? It's outside my expertise. I bring nothing to the table. Or when clients ask me, do you handle Philly also? And I say, no, because I bring no expertise to it, right? I don't know the difference between this street and that street. And so the same thing I think applies in the law. So they need to be with a specialist like yourself. They may also need a real estate attorney as well, but they need someone like you, a real estate attorney handling the contract and the transaction, but someone like you setting up the after the closing part of it.
Right. I mean, I have done for divorce clients or whatever, like a review of simple real estate documents, but I don't do closings. Except I had to do one when I was when I was appointed as the administrator of an estate. So I was actually selling, but I don't do closings. And if you're going to have a lawyer for closing, which not everybody does, especially in South Jersey, but if you're going to, you should see a specialist in real estate law because they're just going to know what they're doing. And people like me are going to know the basics, but we're not going to be able to get you out of some significant issues.
And so from a relationship standpoint, there's a lot of hidden issues that they need to talk to an attorney on. And we could be here all day and probably not cover all of them.
Sure.
Then, as you and I spoke offline, my wife and I in structuring our estate, and not only what I could see is making sure that, those assets are being left to the people we want them to go to so we get the will in place. But also we need to start planning for long-term care. Mm-hmm. And disability, and losing all of that wealth or that equity that was built up for lack of planning, right? So the sooner we set that up, the safer we are, right?
Right. And, let me also add, because you're young yet, and, I say this to everybody, Now's a good time to look at life insurance if you can get it, because life insurance is tax free, and it is it provides a number of, first off, it's quick to get. It goes outside a will, you don't have to wait. So your life insurance company can turn a check around really quickly to help keep things moving while the estate's being dealt with. Secondly, you can get your funeral expenses paid out of, they'll just look at a life insurance policy and say, oh,
Right.
okay, you have it, and they'll take care of it. So if you have children that don't have a lot of money, that's a godsend for them to have the ability to take care of your last wishes and have the money available to take care of that. And finally, it's just a great way of pointing and directing money to certain people outside of a will. So you were talking about you wanted to make sure your grandkids inherited, and you can do that by setting up trusts and things like that, so that money goes to them, no matter what happens to your spouse's choices after you pass. But there's also life insurance to make sure that the little ones get very specific numbers of gifts.
That's good to know.
That's not going to in any way be harmed by anyone else's interests.
There's a lot of planning involved in this. And like I said, I think we could speak for hours and only touch the surface on it. And I know you have a hard time coming up, so I don't want to hold you too much. If a young couple or a young individual, they're in a relationship and they're looking to start entering into real estate, what would be the best advice you could give them off the bat?
So is this young couple married or not?
Unmarried.
Okay. Get a contract, maybe even form an LLC together if you're going to purchase real estate together, so that you have clear, easy ways of dealing with the contracts and dealing with a dissolution if the two of you break up. Be very clear about what money went in where, keep your records. Be very clear about who's putting in money to maintain or improve the property. Don't assume that everything's going to work out, because you just don't know. But also, COVID has taught us, young or not, things can happen.
Yeah.
So have your estate plan ready too to handle anything that might come up. And if there's minimal assets and you're young, there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't get life insurance to protect that property. Because if, the two of you are making $30,000 a year each and you have to pay this mortgage, if one of you passes away, the other one's going to struggle. So a life insurance policy for enough money to cover that mortgage is going to set that other person that you love up for their life.
Good advice. So we're going to hope for the best, plan for the worst, as we should in everything in life, especially when we're talking about relationships, because marriage is a greater than 50% fail rate for the most part. So
there's different ways of approaching that statistic, but for certain, we know a lot of people get divorced, sometimes more often than once.
Well, yeah. Well, I joke with some friends that are going on their third. I said, if you're 0 for 3, you're the problem, not the people you're marrying, right?
Well, guess what? I'm on my third, so.
You're the constant, though.
I'm the constant.
So in all of our show notes, we'll have the contact information for Lynda. If you have any questions on estate planning or marital assets, consultations, do you do free consultations, or is there a fee involved, or a retainer, or?
Free initial consultations. If you need a second one, sometimes, people just want to pay for like a half hour of my time. I can do that if you just need to talk things through. So we do all of that, trying to help people get things going in their life.
Okay. All right. So we have all of our contact information. Email's the best way, or Facebook Messenger, or, what's the...
Any call, email, send a llama with a little gift, whatever it takes. I'll pay attention.
You're like me. Call me whatever you want, and I'll answer. Just make sure you call. All right, great. I appreciate your time. I know you're very busy. I know your time is extremely valuable. Truly appreciate it. And I think maybe we should come back at a later date with a second one of these and dive in a little bit deeper, especially on the elder care and the estate planning when it comes to real estate. And there's a lot of pitfalls there for people that I've seen, where the equity's taken by Medicare and it's gone. And what was thought to be an inheritance to children is history now. Or there was a huge penalty charged back by Medicare against the estate when it was sold and distributed. So there's a lot there that I think we should talk about. And I think we could spend hours talking about relationships in real estate, but I can't hold you up. I know you've got a time to go. I want to thank you, and I'd love to get together. And I am going to reach out to you and schedule that meeting with you, me, and my wife to start setting up our state, because I'm not going to procrastinate it anymore.
Sounds like a plan.
Take advantage of it. Lynda, thank you very much. Have a great day. Stay safe, wash our hands, wear our masks, and keep our distance.
Amen.
Thank you.